I was the neglected legitimate daughter of the Prime Minister's mansion. No one knew that every night, the Crown Prince would sneak into my courtyard to share my bed. Finally, one day, I found out I was pregnant. Clutching his hand, I begged him to give me a proper status. The hand that had been caressing my back suddenly froze. "Your sister just found out she's expecting too. I don't want to upset her," he said. My heart sank. They all said the Crown Prince doted on my sister like she was the apple of his eye. Turns out the rumors were true. A month later, my father asked me, "The Emperor is gravely ill. I've decided to send you into the palace to pray for his recovery. Will you go?" After a long silence, I nodded. "I will." That night, Xiao Qi came to my courtyard as usual. After our tryst, I lay in his arms, staring up at his handsome face in a daze. Hesitating for a long while, I said to him, "Your Highness, this servant is already yours. I only beg for your compassion. Grant me a title, even if it's just a lowly concubine. It would fulfill my devotion to you, allowing me to stay by your side forever." Though I spoke these words, I knew perfectly well the Prime Minister's mansion would never let its legitimate daughter become a mere concubine, not even to the Crown Prince, even as the neglected legitimate daughter, for the sake of the mansion's honor. I would at least secure the position of a Crown Prince's consort. Once I stepped into the Eastern Palace, I would never again be at anyone's mercy. The hand on my back stopped moving again. He looked at me as if I were a foolish, unruly child. After a long pause, he said flatly, "Your sister just found out she's expecting too. I don't want to upset her." The sister Xiao Qi spoke of was my half-sister Ju Wn, the beloved daughter of my father's most favored secondary wife. The secondary wife was my father's cousin. When her family fell on hard times, she came to the capital seeking shelter with him. He took her in and then into his bed. After Ju Wn was born, my father had her registered under my mother's name and promoted her mother to the status of secondary wife with equal standing. Ever since that woman climbed into my father's bed, my mother had been bedridden with grief. Over the years, my father's official career had flourished. He was no longer the poor scholar who had once relied on my mother's family background to advance, so no matter how much my mother objected, she couldn't stop him from doing as he pleased. Later, when Ju Wn came of age, she married Crown Prince Xiao Qi and became his official crown princess. As for me, I was nothing more than the neglected legitimate daughter of the Prime Minister's mansion. I had grown up wild like a weed these past years, trampled on by anyone who pleased. But no one knew that on the day Ju Wn married Xiao Qi, he had laid eyes on me across the wedding feast, and for the past 3 years, every single night, Xiao Qi had come to my courtyard to share my bed. 3 years had passed in the blink of an eye. I had foolishly thought that after all this time, Xiao Qi might have developed some affection for me, but I was wrong. Xiao Qi still saw me as nothing more than a plaything, to be discarded once he grew tired of me. Hearing his words, my heart ached. They all said the Crown Prince loved his wife deeply, doted on her like she was the apple of his eye. Turns out the rumors were true. Ju Wn truly was lucky. I forced down the bitterness in my heart and helped Xiao Qi dress as I always did. Seeing how obedient I was, he suddenly smiled. He wrapped an arm around my waist, picked up a cup of wine from the table, and poured it into my mouth. "I am the Crown Prince now. Everyone's eyes are on me. Be patient a little longer. And I promise you'll be the mistress of your own palace," he said. The wine burned my throat, making me cough violently. I leaned over the table and retched. Xiao Qi's expression turned strange. "Are you with child?" My heart skipped a beat. Looking at his darkening face, I stammered, What if this servant is pregnant?" Xiao Qi didn't hesitate for a moment. "Then get rid of it," he said coldly. My heart turned to ice. I forced a smile and said, "If your highness hadn't forced me to drink that wine, I wouldn't be retching like this. I've never liked alcohol. Has your highness forgotten? I have been taking the contraceptive medicine all this time." Then I added, my voice filled with sorrow, "I long to bear your highness a child, but without your permission, I dare not." The next time I saw Xiao Qi was a month later. He had brought Ju Wn back to the Prime Minister's mansion, when the news spread that Ju Wn was 2 months pregnant. The entire mansion erupted in joy, watching Xiao Qi fuss over Ju Wn. Gentle and attentive, A sharp pain twisted in my chest. Perhaps I was jealous that she had a husband who cared for her so deeply. My father and his secondary wife had always hated me. I had no desire to watch their happy family reunion, so I turned and left. But it wasn't long before a servant came to fetch me, saying my father wanted to see me. I had just helped my mother take her medicine and watched her fall asleep. Filled with confusion, I made my way to the front courtyard. The room was filled with laughter and chatter, punctuated by Ju Wan's coquettish voice. My elder sister thinks she's so high and mighty, so choosy about her marriage. Last month, mother went to great lengths to find her a good match. She would have been the main wife. But she refused. I bet she's just dying to be a concubine to my husband. Xiao Qi chuckled and soothed her. I only love you. I wouldn't have anyone else. I could stand it no longer. Lifting my feet, I walked into the room and froze when I saw a pale-faced eunuch standing there. Confused, I still bowed respectfully. My father stroked his beard, a kind smile on his face. He said to me jovially, "The emperor is gravely ill. I consulted the imperial astrologer and had him read your fortune. That is why I have decided to send you into the palace to pray for his recovery. Will you go?" I stared at him blankly. The four of them sat up there, looking at me with calm disdain, as if I were nothing more than an ant beneath their feet. Ju Wn smirked. "Elder sister, you turned down the marriage mother arranged for you, so we found you an even better position. It was my husband who begged the emperor for this imperial edict. All because you are my sister." Hearing Ju Wan's words, I felt like I had been plunged into an icy abyss. I looked at Xiao Qi in disbelief. But he couldn't even spare me a single glance. His eyes were fixed solely on Ju Wn. But I knew Xiao Qi well. He had always valued his reputation above all else, and he cherished Ju Wn and the child in her womb dearly. If I dared to say a single word of refusal, he would have me killed without hesitation. The emperor was gravely ill now. The real power lay in the hands of the empress and Xiao Qi. On the surface, I was entering the palace to become a well-fed, well-clothed concubine, but in truth, I was nothing more than a sacrificial lamb. My chest felt so tight it was hard to breathe. I had shared Xiao Qi's bed for 3 years, and yet he was willing to send me to my death just to make Ju Wn happy. Of course he was. Only if I died could he pretend he had never betrayed Ju Wn these past 3 years. Could he continue to play the part of the devoted husband? Only the dead can keep secrets. I placed a hand on my abdomen, feeling the slight softness there, and suddenly, my heart grew calm. I knelt down. The pale-faced eunuch unfurled the imperial edict in his hands. When he announced that I was being conferred the title of worthy consort, Ju Wan's face turned white with shock. She blurted out, "I thought she was just going to be a lowly maid-in-waiting. Why is she a worthy consort?" The eunuch's expression darkened. He shot her a sharp glance. His voice cold and effeminate. "Does the crown princess have any objections to His Majesty's decision?" Soothed by Xiao Qi, Ju Wn bit her lip and reluctantly apologized. I paid no attention to Ju Wan's resentful glare. I simply took the imperial edict from the eunuch's hands and kowtowed respectfully to thank the emperor for his grace. As night fell, I was carried into the palace in a small sedan chair. Before I left, all the masters and mistresses of the Prime Minister's mansion stood at the gate to see me off. Their eyes were filled with disdain, but when they saw the imperial guards standing by, they still bowed low and knelt to bid me farewell. Such was the power of the imperial throne. Every face in the Prime Minister's mansion wore a smile. After all, sacrificing me alone would bring them greater benefits. Only my mother stood there with red, swollen eyes, her body trembling uncontrollably. But she was afraid that if she cried out, she would bring disaster upon me, so she forced herself to hold back her tears. The palace assigned to me was spacious and grand, filled with all manner of rare treasures and luxuries. It was a far cry from the life I had known. Since childhood, I had lived with my mother in a small, cramped courtyard, where we had to do everything for ourselves. My mother had once written letters to my maternal grandfather begging for help. But his family was stationed at the border, and not a single reply had come all these years. Mother always said we just needed to wait a little longer, but I knew the truth. They had abandoned her. The day had been exhausting, and I was fast asleep when a shadow fell over my bed. I jolted awake. Staring at the dark figure looming over me, I was about to scream. A hand clamped down over my mouth. I smelled the familiar scent on his clothes, and tears streamed down my face. It was Xiao Qi. Seeing that I had calmed down, Xiao Qi released his hand. He glanced around the room, then said, "Jiao Jiao, when I ascend the throne, this palace will be yours and yours alone." Then his eyes turned cold and sharp. He grabbed my chin roughly, his voice icy. "Don't forget that everything you have now is a gift from me. Don't you dare harbor any foolish ideas." I struggled in his grip, gasping out, "Why isn't your highness with the crown princess? She's pregnant. How do you think she would feel if she found out her husband was sneaking off to visit his stepmother in the middle of the night?" Xiao Qi suddenly stroked my face gently. His eyes were soft, tender, as if he were looking at his lover. He leaned down to kiss me, but I turned my head away. His warm, wet lips brushed against my ear, but it felt like the touch of a cold, venomous snake slithering across my skin. Xiao Qi pulled me into his arms, his voice soft as he tried to soothe me. "Is Jiao Jiao jealous again? Wanwan saved my life once. You know, if it weren't for her, I would have died in that cold palace long ago. You claim to love me so much, why must you be jealous of Wanwan? Though I do love Wanwan deeply, you have been with me for 3 years, I do feel reluctant to part with you." I blinked my eyes slowly. Xiao Qi pulled a small porcelain vial from his pocket, his voice soft and low. "As long as Jiao Jiao is a good girl and feeds the contents of this vial to the emperor little by little, I would never let you die. Why, I plan to stay by your side for the rest of our lives." After Xiao Qi left, I picked up the vial and threw it into the lotus pond outside my window, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. I knew perfectly well what I was to Xiao Qi, a mere toy, nothing more, and the current emperor was a wise and benevolent ruler. I had no desire to see him die at the hands of such treacherous schemes. Xiao Qi might think I was a naive little fool, but I was not. I might have loved him once, but I was not stupid. Poisoning the emperor, what kind of fate could that possibly bring me? The Mid-Autumn Festival arrived in no time, and a grand palace banquet was held in the imperial palace. It was the first time I laid eyes on the emperor. Though he looked somewhat frail, his spirits were remarkably good, and his eyes sparkled with vitality. The emperor was an out-and-out handsome man, and I found myself staring at him, lost in a daze. The empress looked displeased. Noticing my distraction, she found an excuse to reprimand me, but the emperor waved a hand dismissively. "The worthy consort is still but a child, there is no need to be so harsh with her, Empress." Then he turned to me, his eyes crinkling with amusement. "I hear you entered the palace of your own accord to pray for my recovery. Now that my health has improved greatly, it is clear that you are my lucky star. Let it be proclaimed, the worthy consort is hereby promoted to worthy noble consort, with the authority to assist in managing the harem affairs." The empress tried to dissuade him, arguing that I had only just entered the palace. The emperor shot her a glance, his tone light yet sharp. "Is not my health the most important matter of all?" I knelt down hastily to express my gratitude. After the banquet, I was walking back to my palace with my maids when we ran into Zhu Duan and Xiao Qi halfway. Xiao Qi looked at me with a complex, even angry gaze. He knew I had disobeyed his order to poison the emperor. Zhu Wan's eyes blazed with jealousy and resentment as she shrieked at me, "Zhu Mingjiao, are you feeling proud of yourself now? Let me tell you this, I will be the future empress. Sooner or later, you will still have to kneel before me." I glanced at the calm-faced maid beside me, who even took a step back discreetly. No need to guess, she was Xiao Qi's spy. Xiao Qi's power had already grown to such an extent, but with the emperor's health improving by the day, could he still hold on to his position as crown prince securely? Staring at Zhu Wan's distorted face, I let out a soft laugh. "Save your boasts until you actually become empress. For now, I am still your father's concubine and his majesty's worthy noble consort." "Crown prince, you really ought to teach your crown princess some manners. She does not conduct herself like one at all." My words left Zhu Duan so furious that her eyes turned bright red. Without a second thought, she raised her hand to slap me. I reached out and grabbed her wrist. Zhu Duan was caught off guard by my resistance, and her anger flared even hotter. I flung her hand away forcefully, my voice cold and stern. This is the imperial palace, not your eastern palace. You must choose your place to throw a tantrum. If the emperor and empress were to learn that the crown princess dared to slap a concubine publicly within the palace walls, I am afraid they would be greatly disappointed in the crown prince. At my words, Xiao Qi pulled Zhu Dublin back. She stared at him in disbelief. Husband, have you been bewitched by this vixen too? Xiao Qi looked somewhat impatient, but when his gaze fell on Zhu Wan's abdomen, he swallowed his irritation and murmured words of comfort to her gently. Paying no more attention to the pair of them, I turned and walked away with a smile on my face. I wandered in the imperial garden for a long time, until the pent-up frustration in my chest finally dissipated. Just as I was about to return to my palace, Xiao Qi stepped forward to block my path. He glared at me accusingly. Are you truly so happy being father's concubine? I looked up at Xiao Qi's handsome face, a face that had once taken root deep in my heart, a face I had pined for countless nights and days. I had always told myself that Xiao Qi and I were merely using each other. He lusted after my body, while I needed the silver from him to pay for my mother's medical treatment. But how could I not have felt something for him? When someone reaches out a hand to you in your darkest hour, when someone shares your pillow and whispers sweet nothings in your ear, how could you not fall for them? Yet every flicker of affection was snuffed out in our secret, hidden trysts, doused by his constant calculations of what was best for his own interests. I lowered my head, my voice soft and gentle. This humble concubine is no more than a fragile willow flower. To be of service to His Majesty is the greatest fortune of my 3 lifetimes. Of course I am happy. Xiao Qi sneered and grabbed my chin roughly, forcing me to meet his eyes. Jiao Jiao has been a bad girl. You threw away the thing I gave you. How should I punish you? He pretended to ponder for a moment, then grinned maliciously. I cannot think of anything right now. But since today is such a joyous occasion for the worthy noble consort, I have invited the Prime Minister's principal wife to enter the palace. You mother and daughter can have a nice, long chat. My heart sank like a stone. The threat in Xiao Qi's words was crystal clear. If I continued to defy his orders, my mother would be in grave danger. Xiao Qi released my chin, then stroked my cheek tenderly, murmuring softly to me as if we were still lovers, Jiao Jiao will not disappoint me, will she? With that, he turned and left. I stared after his retreating figure, my mind in a daze. His back overlapped with the back of a little boy from long ago. I supposed Xiao Qi had long forgotten that we had met once before. I had known him even earlier than Zhu Dublin, back when he was just a prince growing up wild and untamed in the cold palace. That day, I had passed by and seen him being beaten by some snobbish eunuchs. Taking pity on him, I had chased the eunuchs away. He had told me he had been starving for days. All I could give him were a few steamed buns I had hidden from my mother, afraid that the cold food served at the palace banquet would not be enough to fill my stomach. Luckily, I had those buns with me, otherwise, I would not have known what else to do for him. My mother's voice pulled me back to reality. I looked at her emaciated, fragile form before me, and tears streamed down my face uncontrollably. I buried my head in her arms and wept bitterly. For the first time in what felt like forever, our time together passed far too quickly. When it was time for her to leave, I clutched her hand tightly and said to her, "Mother, please hold on a little longer. Your daughter will definitely find a way to save you." But the very next day, my mother passed away. The news of my mother's death reached the palace just as I was forcing myself to eat the food on the table, fighting back waves of nausea. The maid did not hesitate to tell me the news directly. My vision went black, and I almost fainted on the spot. Just yesterday, when I had seen Mother, she had been thin, yes, but her spirit had still been strong. How could she have died so suddenly? It was then that I fully realized how utterly alone I was in this palace. The maids around me waited on me diligently, but their loyalty lay elsewhere with Xiao Qi. Recalling Xiao Qi's words from the previous day, I could no longer contain the rage burning in my chest. I swept the dishes off the table in a fit of fury. It must have been Xiao Qi. He had gone back on his word and killed my mother, grief-stricken by my mother's death. I wanted to beg the emperor to let me leave the palace to attend her funeral and send her off on her final journey. But as soon as I stepped out of my palace gate, I collided head-on with a strange woman, The maids behind me reacted quickly and caught me, but she fell to the ground. Blood began to pool beneath her. She had miscarried. The Empress had me locked up in the Baofar Palace, ordering me to kneel before the Buddha to atone for my sins and for the sin of the innocent royal fetus that had been lost. I knew exactly what was going on. Since Xiao Qi could no longer control me through my mother, he had come up with this scheme to force me to pledge allegiance to the Empress and continue doing his bidding. I knelt in the palace hall, hungry and thirsty, yet I knelt there piously all the same, silently reciting the rebirth mantra in my heart. Xiao Qi burst into the hall suddenly. He pinned me down and tore at my clothes violently. The smell of alcohol on his breath made me retch repeatedly as I struggled with all my might. Xiao Qi backhanded me hard across the face. "You shameless bitch, stop putting on this act. I've had my fill of you after 3 years, stop pretending to be some virtuous, chaste woman," I screamed in despair, calling out the names of my maids even though I knew they were Xiao Qi's people and would never come to my rescue. But I did not know who else to call. The Emperor. Yes, the Emperor, but his health had only just recovered. He must be resting in the Hall of Mental Cultivation right now. No one could save me. Xiao Qi's face twisted into a ferocious snarl. "This is what happens when you disobey me. You refused to poison father, and now you've gotten your mother killed if you continue to defy me. Your maternal grandfather and uncles stationed at the border will all die because of your stubbornness." My hands fell limply to my sides, even though my grandfather and uncles had abandoned my mother and me long ago. I still remembered the times they had taken me out to play, the times they had carried me on their backs to watch the lantern festivals. Just as I was sinking into the depths of despair, a voice rang out from the doorway. Xiao Qi flew into a rage and shouted, "Can't you see what I'm doing? I'm sleeping with father's woman. Who the hell do you think you are to interfere with me, Crown Prince?" His words trailed off abruptly. His face turned bright red, and terror filled his eyes. Standing in the doorway was none other than His Imperial Majesty, the Emperor himself. Xiao Qi dropped to his knees before the Emperor, weeping and sniveling. "Father, please see the truth. It was all the worthy noble consort's fault. She seduced me." The Emperor helped me to my feet and draped his cloak over my shoulders. He sighed deeply. "After all these years, I see I have still spoiled you rotten and let your ambition grow too wild." After Xiao Qi was dragged away, the Emperor's face was dark and stormy. He looked at me, his gaze cold and piercing. Finally, he spoke. "Now that you have entered the palace, you must forget all the people and things from outside these walls. I will posthumously confer a title upon your mother." I knelt down again. "I humbly beg your Majesty to grant my mother a divorce from Prime Minister Zhu." When the Emperor looked at me in confusion, I replied respectfully. It was my mother's dying wish to never lay eyes on Prime Minister Zhu again for the rest of her life. Before he left, the Emperor turned to me and said, "I have already thoroughly investigated the matter. That woman took an abortifacient before coming to you. You were merely an innocent victim of circumstance. I will not blame you. You have been through quite an ordeal. The night air is growing cold. You should return to your palace to rest early. As for the abortifacient in your possession, you may dispose of it. Take good care of my royal heir." Upon hearing the Emperor's words, I stared at him in stunned shock. My mother was posthumously granted the title of first-rank titled lady. The Emperor also sent messengers to the border, ordering my maternal grandfather and uncles to return to the capital to attend her funeral. The Empress was confined to her palace, forbidden to leave without an imperial summons. Xiao Qi, the crown prince, was stripped of his title and reduced to a commoner. He and Zhu Wn were imprisoned in the imperial clan court for life. Upon hearing this news, the Empress committed suicide that very night, leaving behind a blood-stained letter. Her only wish was to secure Xiao Qi's freedom, and she took full responsibility for all the crimes in the letter, every word written in her own blood. The news of the Empress's suicide reached me while I was in the Emperor's Hall of Mental Cultivation. Thanking him for his kindness and also trying to sound out his reasons for summoning my grandfather and uncles back to the capital, the Emperor narrowed his phoenix eyes and looked at me, and I felt a flicker of unease stir in my heart. After a long while, he suddenly let out a hearty laugh. You little minx, do you think I am the kind of suspicious emperor who summoned your grandfather and uncles back to the capital just to seize their military power? My cheeks flushed slightly, and I let out a silent sigh. The emperor was indeed the emperor. No thought of mine could ever be hidden from him. On second thought, my attempt to probe him had been rather clumsy. It was only my recent favor with the emperor that had given me the courage to do so. I smiled and rose to my feet, intending to go over and massage his shoulders. Just then, his personal eunuch walked into the hall with a grave expression on his face and reported the news of the empress's suicide to him. Upon hearing the news, the emperor's expression darkened. I felt a surge of fear wash over me. Shortly after, the empress's blood-stained letter was brought in. The emperor glanced at my slightly swollen abdomen and gestured for me to stand further away. The letter reeks of blood. I would not want it to make you feel unwell again. I thanked him gratefully. The emperor read the letter, his handsome brows furrowing tightly together. Then he let out a long, heavy sigh when he looked up at me. He forced a faint smile. Would you like to know what the empress wrote in the letter? I shook my head hastily. Though I was burning with curiosity, I was even more afraid that if I learned of the treasonous words written on it, I would end up dead sooner. The emperor suddenly burst into hearty laughter. I never would have guessed you were such a two-faced little thing, dying to know the truth, yet still so cautious. His mood had suddenly brightened, and I breathed a silent sigh of relief. The emperor said, "The empress begged me to spare the deposed crown prince, taking full responsibility for all his crimes. The empress and I were childhood sweethearts. Her family, the Marquis of Chenzhen, sacrificed everything, even their lives, for my imperial throne. That is why I promised the empress that Xiao Qi would be the crown prince, the future emperor. When I ascended the throne, the realm was plagued by both internal unrest and external threats. To protect Xiao Qi, I had no choice but to neglect him. By the time I had eliminated all my enemies, both Xiao Qi and the empress had changed. I know it was my fault, but I am deeply disappointed. I never imagined Xiao Qi would turn out to be such a man. It was I who spoiled him and let his ambition fester. I have several sons, yet now it seems none of them are fit to shoulder the great responsibility of ruling. The empress invoked all the years of our friendship against me. Tell me, what should I do?" I fell silent for a long time. Then the emperor waved a hand dismissively. "Never mind, the child in your belly, who knows what kind of ruler he will grow up to be. First, we need to set up a decoy." On the day I was conferred the title of imperial noble consort, my maternal grandfather and uncles finally arrived in the capital. Fortunately, the weather was cold, allowing my mother's remains to be preserved long enough for them to see her one last time. They hastily knelt to kowtow to the emperor and me, then fell silent as they stared at my mother's exquisite coffin, their faces racked with overwhelming grief. Watching them suffer so deeply, my heart ached, but it was also filled with anger. For all these years, Mother wrote to you begging for help, yet not a single letter of yours ever reached her. At my words, my grandfather looked utterly shocked. Begging for help. Every letter your mother sent us was nothing but a message to say she was safe and well. I froze in stunned silence. The white-haired yet sturdy old man before me burst into tears. He pulled out a thick stack of letters, and when I opened them, I recognized my mother's handwriting, but every word was a cheerful report about her peaceful life. I finally understood. It must have been my good-for-nothing father who, fearing my grandfather's wrath and retribution, had intercepted all the letters between them and forged replies in my mother's handwriting. That was why my mother had been left isolated and helpless for over a decade. He never wanted her to have anyone to stand up for her, otherwise he would never have been able to bestow a title on his beloved cousin. He also dared not let the people of the capital know how he had favored his concubine and abused his wife. My grandfather was so enraged that he grabbed a sword, intent on going to the Prime Minister's mansion to kill my father. It took all my uncle's combined efforts to restrain him. He looked at me with deep remorse, wanting to take my hand, but hesitated, mindful of my imperial status. Finally, he knelt down tremblingly. "Your humble servant offers his respects to your highness, the imperial noble consort." Tears streamed down my face before I even realized it. During those hardest 10 years, My mother and I had not been truly alone and helpless. It was only the schemes of a villain that had kept us apart from our family, who had their own great responsibilities to bear. After learning the full story, the emperor issued an imperial edict reprimanding my father, stripping him of his official position and demoting his secondary wife to the status of a mere concubine. My grandfather and uncles, consumed by resentment, went to the Prime Minister's mansion every day to hurl insults at my father. Tormented by regret, my father sent countless letters to me, begging me to spare him for the sake of our blood ties, but I merely ordered my maids to stop delivering any more of his letters to my palace. I found his pleas utterly repulsive. The reason the emperor did not make me his empress was simple. He needed to have princes whose birth mothers were empresses, allowing them to fight among themselves for the throne. Xiao Qi was that decoy. I had always thought I would be painted as the seductive concubine who had ensnared the emperor with her wiles, but the emperor had other plans. He sent people to spread word among the common folk of my great fortune, proclaiming me his destined savior. The reason his health had improved so dramatically was all because I had volunteered to enter the palace to pray for him. 10 months passed in the blink of an eye. My belly swelled high with child, and even the emperor seemed to grow nervous. During those months, Xiao Qi had fought tooth and nail against the other princes. The fact that he had been released despite committing such heinous crimes led the other princes to believe that the emperor still favored him as the heir apparent, filling them with resentment. As for me, the imperial noble consort, though the child in my belly was also the emperor's son, the other princes were already grown men. To them, my unborn child was nothing more than a lucky charm. Instead, they showered me with care and attention, hoping I would speak well of them to the emperor. All of them except Xiao Qi. Xiao Qi looked at me with the strangest gaze, one filled with profound disappointment, as if he resented me for giving myself to the emperor, for betraying him. He tried countless times to approach me to ask me something, but was always stopped by my maids. The maids around me were no longer his spies. The entire palace had undergone a thorough purge. Now, every single person in it was loyal to the emperor. I said nothing as I met Xiao Qi's bitter, reproachful eyes. As Xiao Qi's gaze grew increasingly resentful, Ju Wan's anger flared hotter and hotter. Spoiled rotten by my father and his secondary wife, then coddled by Xiao Qi after their marriage, she still could not see her true place in the world. She still thought of herself as the high and mighty crown princess. But no sooner had a look of defiance crossed her face than a maid struck her hard across the cheek. I knew exactly what Xiao Qi wanted to ask me, and I was just as eager to know the answer to my own questions. Ever since I entered the palace, even though the emperor had showered me with favor, he had never once touched me. I had originally thought it was because he knew I had been with Xiao Qi, that he found me unclean, yet his affection for me had been genuine. Completely devoid of any carnal desire, he had never once stayed the night in my palace, nor had he ever had any physical contact with me. When rumors began to spread that I had fallen out of favor, another rumor quickly emerged to counter them. This new rumor claimed that the emperor loved me more than anything. Regarding me as a divine blessing sent by heaven, he believed that any physical touch from him would be a desecration of my purity. I knew perfectly well that it was the emperor himself who had ordered these rumors to be spread. On the day it was discovered that I was carrying twins, I looked at the overjoyed emperor, my cheeks flushing red as I hesitantly asked, "Your Majesty, you must have heard what the people are saying about me. Why?" The emperor smiled gently. "The empress and I once had a daughter. If she had lived, she would be about your age now. The way you look at me, there is no trace of love in your eyes. Only respect, and that is a good thing. Otherwise, I would have a terrible headache. After all, I have always regarded you as my own daughter. I knew all along that the child in your belly is Xiao Qi. I have known everything he has done all these years. The moment you became pregnant and went to fetch that abortifacient, I had already drawn up an imperial edict betrothing you to him as his consort. I never imagined he would be so heartless as to send you into the palace to be my concubine, but then I thought your entering the palace might not be such a bad thing. If the child in your belly is a boy, I will raise him up to be my heir. If it is a girl, I will adopt a child from the imperial clan, grant your daughter a fiefdom, and send you both far away from the capital." Upon hearing the emperor's words, I broke down into uncontrollable sobs. I finally understood the true meaning of his favor. It was the paternal love I had never known. The day I went into labor, a heavy rainstorm descended upon the capital. As soon as the twins, a boy and a girl, were born, the rain suddenly stopped. The emperor was overjoyed, immediately bestowing titles and fiefdoms upon the newborn prince and princess. Meanwhile, the struggles among the grown princes grew even more intense. The emperor and I would sit together, playing with the children. As we watched the princes put on their petty little dramas, even though the emperor had deliberately spread the word that the twins were premature, Xiao Qi still seemed to sense something was amiss. He fought his way into my palace, paying no heed to the emperor's presence. He called out my name, his voice desperate. "Jiao Jiao, these two children are mine, aren't they?" At his words, the emperor looked at him with profound disappointment. All the maids and eunuchs in the hall bowed their heads and busied themselves with trivial tasks. They were all loyal to the emperor, and naturally, none of them dared to say a word. Yet still, the emperor could not hide his disappointment in his son. He knew full well that Xiao Qi's reckless words could plunge both me and the children into unspeakable peril. If he had not known about my past with Xiao Qi, if he had not orchestrated everything from behind the scenes, I would have long ago despaired and taken my own life amid the endless rumors and slander. The emperor said coldly, "How dare you address the imperial noble consort in such a manner? Have you lost your mind? I regret ever releasing you from imprisonment. To think you would resort to such underhanded tactics to frame the imperial noble consort." After Xiao Qi was dragged away, the emperor's expression clouded over with sadness. I knew exactly what he was grieving for. Xiao Qi was the son of his beloved late wife, the child he had pinned all his hopes on, and yet he had grown into a man the emperor held in such contempt. The emperor held the little princess in his arms. For the first time, I saw a look of utter confusion in his eyes as he asked me, "What if I fail to teach this child well?" He did not wait for me to answer. Perhaps he had not expected me to have an answer at all. He looked suddenly aged, sitting there on the throne. Though still handsome, his appearance filled me with a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread, as if he were about to leave me forever. The little princess in his arms let out a soft cry, and he snapped back to his senses. He let out a bitter laugh. I have allowed myself to become too attached. I knew nothing of state affairs, nor was it my place to speak of them. I could only watch in silence as the emperor racked his brains, struggling to find a way forward. For he was not merely raising a child, he was grooming a future emperor. Fortunately, heaven smiled upon us. The children did not grow up to be spoiled or arrogant. By the time they turned 6, they had already displayed extraordinary talent and wisdom. Unlike their father, they were humble and courteous, yet possessed a strong sense of justice and duty. They knew when to advance and when to retreat. Kind yet firm, they were destined to be worthy rulers. The emperor did something unprecedented. He stayed the night in my palace. That night, he did not sleep. Instead, he knelt in meditation before the small Buddha shrine in my palace until dawn broke. Worried about his health, I was about to urge him to rest when I heard it. I heard the sound of his suppressed sobs. An emperor is supposed to be unfeeling, never to shed a tear easily. Yet this was the second time I had seen him cry. The first time had been the day the empress committed suicide, when he read her blood-stained letter, though he had tried his best to hide it. I had still caught a glimpse of the tears in his eyes, all the pain in his heart, all the burdens of his position. He struggled with them alone, night after night. All he had ever wanted was a worthy heir. It was clear from the name he had given my son, Xiao Lian. Fortunately, Xiao Lian proved to be an exceptionally intelligent child. I was certain that if my daughter, Chang'an, had also proven to be a worthy heir, he would have moved heaven and earth to make her the crown princess. As I watched the emperor kneeling before the Buddha statue, I quietly knelt outside the door as well, kowtowing to thank the Buddha for his blessings. Seasons passed, winter giving way to spring. No matter how carefully the emperor took care of his health, he fell gravely ill after being caught in a heavy rainstorm. The illness struck him with relentless ferocity. I stayed by his side day and night, watching him lie weak and frail on his dragon bed. my heart breaking into a million pieces. All these years, he had dedicated himself to teaching Liana, and Liana had worked tirelessly in return. The other princes, sensing the emperor's true intentions, struggled for a while before finally giving up their futile bids for the throne, all except Xiao Qi, who continued to flail about, trying to stir up trouble. 2 months after I gave birth to the twins, Zhu Wn also went into labor, delivering a daughter. She had been utterly distraught, screaming that the child in her womb had been a boy, that someone had stolen her son away, and that I was the mastermind behind it all. Only after being reprimanded repeatedly did she finally quiet down and accept her fate. But none of this mattered to me anymore. I looked at the emperor, tears streaming down my face uncontrollably. After the needles were administered, the emperor slowly opened his eyes. Looking at me, he sighed softly. "How old are you now?" Still crying like a child. "The children will laugh at you." I knelt beside his bed, sobbing so hard I could barely catch my breath. "In your majesty's presence, this humble concubine will always be a child." The emperor said nothing. He took Liana's hand in his own, his voice earnest as he charged the boy. "Your mother has led an extremely difficult life. From now on, you must take my place and care for her. Never defy her wishes. You must protect your little sister, be her rock, and ensure she never has to suffer wrongs without anyone to stand up for her." Liana nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. Then the emperor took Chang'an's hand, his tone gentle yet firm. "You are the eldest princess. No one in this realm dares to bully you. Do not cry." When the ministers arrived, the emperor's personal eunuch, his eyes swollen red from crying, unfurled the imperial edict in front of them all. Written on it was the name of my son, Xiao Lian. There was another edict as well, a decree ordering Xiao Qi's execution. After seeing to all these matters, he dismissed everyone from the room, leaving only me, Liana, and Chang'an behind. Liana took Chang'an's hand and knelt down before the emperor's bed. Looking into the emperor's cloudy eyes, he choked out, "Father, rest assured, I will take good care of Zhening. Chang'an and I both know what we must do." Zhening was the daughter Zhu Wn had given birth to. The emperor smiled weakly. "I know, you are all good children. At last, it was just the two of us left alone." The emperor lifted his hand with great effort and gently brushed the tears from my cheeks. "Do not cry, I still have to thank you. After I die, do it quietly, quietly place the empress in my coffin. She was my first wife. Her mistakes, I will talk to her about them properly in the afterlife." Tears poured down my face like rain. I nodded my head frantically, unable to speak. No matter how hard I tried to hold on to him, the light of life in the emperor's eyes gradually faded away. I let out a heart-wrenching wail. This time, no familiar voice would ever come to comfort me again. After Liana ascended the throne, he honored me as the Empress Dowager. The late emperor had left Liana with a wealth of talented ministers, each checking and balancing the other so that no single individual could amass too much power. This prevented the disasters that often befell a realm when a young ruler ascended the throne. Liana proved to be a worthy emperor. I took a vial of poisoned wine and went to Xiao Qi's residence. Over the years, his life had grown increasingly shabby and desolate, with heavy troops guarding the mansion day and night. The late emperor had secretly been looking after Zhening all these years, yet she was still thin and frail, but her eyes shone brightly with intelligence. When she saw me, she knelt down and kowtowed respectfully. Zhu Wn screamed at her to stop, but Zhening paid her no heed. I had known of Zhening's hardships all these years, and I knew what kind of person she was. Unlike her infamous, despicable parents, she was upright and kind-hearted. I had wanted to take her away and raise her by my side once, but she had refused. She had said she did not want to be a burden to me. Now, that burden no longer existed. Zhening was obedient. Leaving the room without hesitation, I looked at Xiao Qi, his face covered in unkempt beard stubble. He tried to approach me, but my maids roughly pushed him away. "Do not come near Her Majesty the Empress Dowager." Xiao Qi froze in shock. "Empress Dowager? But I am the new emperor. Jiao Jiao, you are my noble consort. I will confer the title of noble consort upon you. Though Zhu Wn is a madwoman, I cannot let the whole world laugh at me for casting her aside. But rest assured, she will only have the empty title of empress. I could not help but laugh bitterly. Even at this final moment, he was still obsessed with his reputation and social standing. Though Ju Wn had lost her mind, she had truly loved him all these years. She had been willing to sacrifice her dignity to fight for him. But well, I had known it all along. Xiao Qi was a man of cold, unfeeling heart. I informed him of the late emperor's edict. His face turned ashen with disbelief. Ju Wn launched into a tirade of insults, screaming that I was a shameless whore. My maids gagged her mouth shut. I looked at the pitiful, disheveled figure of Xiao Qi and said calmly, "Your Highness, when I was 7 years old, I entered the palace with my mother. I saw that the flowers in the imperial garden were in full bloom, so I wandered along the paths until I reached the cold palace. There, I saw several eunuchs bullying a young boy. I drove those eunuchs away. That boy told me he was starving. I gave him my steamed buns. He said he would repay me one day. I have often wondered why he ever thought my name was Ju Wn. I suppose Ju Wn must have lied to him about it. I had always wanted to tell him the truth. Now I understand. He knew the truth all along, he just did not want to admit it. Is that not right?" With that, I set down the vial of poisoned wine and turned to leave. Behind me, heart-rending screams echoed through the room. One of my maids glanced back and reported to me, "Ju Wn has also died by suicide." Following Xiao Qi to the grave, I boarded the imperial carriage to return to the palace. The carriage was luxurious and grand, nothing at all like the shabby little sedan chair that had carried me into the palace all those years ago.